Morning, Colonel.
Good morning, Advocate.
At the beginning, let me just put it on record to say, on behalf of accused number 2, we don't know what happened at the scene, inside the kitchen, at that crime scene. So I'm not going to proffer any theory of explanation about what happened there, because my instructions are that accused number 2 says he was not at that scene. He's not part of the people that committed this offense, and he doesn't know anything about that offense.
Angikusho ke ngisaqala ke ukuthi ke akukho engizokusho kuwena ke ngithi yilokho kwenzeka lapha yana kwenzeka lokho cha azange kwenzeke lokho ngoba ke uyasho ke umangalelo wesibili ukuthi yena ke wayengekho lapha yana wayengasona ingxenye yabantu ababekhona lapha yana kule ndawo ngaleli yalama manje okwenzeka lapha akakwazi.
Now, what I want to begin with is recapping on your training, your experience, and your background in forensic ballistics. Now, if understood your evidence last year was that at the time you were 29 years in the police and 28 years in the ballistic section of the forensic science laboratory, correct?
That is correct.
Umufakaza noma uthula ukufakaza bakho bekunyaka wendlule ushilo ke ukuthi ngaleso sikhathi leso koneminyaka ewu29 usemaphoyiseni futhi ke uneminyaka ewu28 usebenza ke ngama ballistics noma ke ibhamu nenhlamvu.
And you are a forensic crime scene analyst and a forensic firearms and firearms components tools examiner, correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Nokuthi ke ngisebenza ke kwindawo zezigameko ngisebenza futhi ngophathelene nazo ibhamu.
And amongst others in your training, you have received training with regard to what is termed a comparison microscope, correct?
That's correct, my lord.
Ngikhulumile ke nange microscope eyokuqhathanisa noma lokubiza ngokuthi ke comparison microscope esetshenziswa ke ukuqhathanisa.
In brief, for those of us who are not ballistically learned, what is a comparison microscope?
My lord, the comparison microscope is the instrument that we use to compare. It's either your bullets or your cartridge cases if they have the similar markings on them which were transferred by a firearm during the firing process.
Lana ke leyo microscope engikhuluma ngayo ke isetshenziselwa ke ukubheka ke ukuthi khona yini ke uma usebenzisa inhlamvu kanye futhi nalo ke igobolondo ukubheka ukuthi akhona yini ama mark afanayo ke adluliswe isibhamu ngenkathi ke sisetshenziswa isibhamu leso ukuthi sidubule.
Yes, but I want to give everybody a picture of what that comparison microscope is, because I'm used to this lab comparison microscope that we used to use at school, the single one that you look here. Yours, how does it look, and how do you test an exhibit bullet together with a test bullet on that microscope?
My lord, using a comparison microscope, what we normally do is, if you have two specimens, let's say 2 bullets,
Yes.
let's say picked up from the crime scene or collected from the crime scene, we come with them and then we mark them, and after marking them, you put them on your microscope to compare them.
Esokwenzekayo asithi uneyinhlamvu ezimbili. Enye uzithole lezo nhlamvu lezo la isigameko senze khona. Uyathatha ke uza nazo ele ila oyimarka khona ke usuthatha khona ke yona ke lolo tools leyo noma leyo microscope leyo ke uzoyisebenzisa ukubheka noma ukuqhathanisa.
When using the comparison microscope, what you'll do is you'll put one specimen on your left-hand side and then the other specimen on your right-hand side. When you look through the eyepiece, you can see both items at the same time.
Mase uyayithatha ke manje zombili. Enye uyibeka kwisandla sakho sokumele, enye uyibeka kwisandla sakho sokudla, bese uyathatha ke manje lokho obheka ngakho. Uyayibona ke zombili ngesikhathi esisodwa.
So, in essence, that comparison microscope, it's 2 lenses, this side and this side, connected together, and you can focus on 2 bullets, the one on the left, the one on the right, and you do your comparison. Is that my understanding of how that and treatment works.
That's correct, my lord.
Yebo kuyiqiniso-ke ukuthi-ke ama-lens amabili-ke owasebenzisayo ukubheka lezi iy'nhlamvu ey'mbili-ke le ese-left ku-right.
And furthermore, regarding your training, you said you received training on the different manufacturing processes of firearms and firearm components, and you also traveled to or visited factories and manufacturers of ammunition and bullets. Is that correct?
That is correct, my lord.
Ngishilo-ke ukuthi na uqeqesho lwami-ke luhlangene nokwenziwayo nendlela ezahlukeneke zokwenziwa kwazi ibhamu nokuya-ke kuma-factories la kwenziwa khona iy'nhlamvu.
And you have visited, I'm not going to repeat them, local factories here in South Africa. You've visited is it the Norinco factory in China or the Lorinco? I don't know the difference, Lorinco, Norinco.
That's correct. In Norinco, we've visited a number of factories in Norinco which manufacture the Norinco type pistols.
Kuyiqiniso ngokumayelana nayo-ke inorinco saya kuma-factory-ke ahlukene enza-ke ama-pistol ayo inorinco.
And you have also, during your evidence, when you are putting your experience, referred to several what are called noteworthy cases that you were involved in, correct?
That's correct, ma'am.
Ushilo-ke futhi nangamaqala-ke ahlukeneke osuyileke noma-ke osebenze kuwona yebo.
There's a case that I'm going to refer you to, but I haven't printed it yet regarding your experience. Then I'll discuss it at the end of my evidence with you. So I'll move on. In your industry, that is the ballistic section, there's certain terminology that you use regularly in your work, correct? Certain terminology. I'll give you the terms and I want you to describe or explain them or what they mean, right? When we talk about an identification, what are we talking about?
When you talk about identification,
Yes.
it's when you're using your microscope, you identify, you look for identification marks, those or similar markings which are identical
Yes.
on both. It's either your test or on your exhibits or both your exhibits. It depends on what you're working on.
All right.
You look for the similarities.
Yes.
Then you can identify. Once you have your identification, any mark that you can identify, that's the mark that you're going to use to identify further exhibits that are related or maybe which were caused by the same tool or the same firearm.
Lana sikhuluma-ke ngaloko okutholayo-ke uma ubheka-ke kule thuluzi ebengikhulume ngalo ukuthi siyasebenzisa ubheka-ke ama-mark noma imark ethize oyitholayo-ke iyona-ke leyo-ke esikhuluma ngayo uma sikhuluma ngaloko-ke ummeli athi-ke i-identification.
And you speak about, when you are doing a comparison and a finding, you speak about an elimination or exclusion. What does that mean?
Right. Elimination or exclusion is where you find two specimens that you can see there's differences in them, showing that they were not made by the same tool. Then you eliminate one from, let's say you have a firearm and a bullet from a crime scene or a cartridge case from a crime scene. With a firearm, you're going to shoot the test. You compare the test that you fired with this firearm with the exhibits that you recovered from a crime scene. Then you look for the similarities. If there are no similarities, you can see more differences on those, or you can see more different class characteristics or different individual marks. Then you say that you are eliminating it. It was not fired from this specific firearm.
Lana sikhuluma ngokuthi uma usuvivinya-ke ubheka-ke usebenzisa sona-ke isibhamu ubuse uyathola-ke ukuthi cha akukho-ke lana okutholakalayo noma ukuthi-ke lokho okutholakala lana kuyatholakala nangalana kuyafana-ke yila manje esesikhuluma khona ukuthi-ke usuyayikhipha-ke ukhiphele eceleni.
And you also talk within examination, comparison and findings about an inconclusive finding. What does inconclusive mean?
My Lord, when you refer to inconclusive findings, the inconclusive findings is where you are working on them. You can see the similarities, maybe of class characteristics and subclass characteristics, but you cannot see all the markings that you see, the individual markings that you are looking at. You can see them, but they are not sufficient enough to make it positive. Then you say that it's inconclusive. Well, by inconclusive, you mean that it cannot conclusively say that this specific bullet or this specific cartridge case was fired in this firearm. The class characteristics may be the same, but the individual markings are not sufficient enough to make it positive.
Lana sikhuluma ngokuthi ke uma kuwukuthi uyabheka ubuse uyathola ukuthi yebo khona ngikubonayo kodwa ke akwanele ke ukuthi ke ngafikelela kwisinqumo noma nginganquma ngithi yiloku ila esikhuluma khona ke ngokuthi ke lokho engikutholile akwanele.
And furthermore, you then speak about not suitable for identification. When will that situation arise?
When we say it's not suitable for identification, we are referring to if it's a bullet, it's fired, it's damaged, in a condition that you cannot do a comparison of the individual markings to the test or your other bullets.
Lana ke sikhuluma ngokuthi asebenziseke inhlamvu ukuthi le nhlamvu itholakeleke kodwa ke isimo engasona ke ukuthi le nhlamvu akukho ukuthi ke ukhona ongakuthola ke kuyona ke noma ke ungakwazi ukuthi ungaqhathanisa ilapho sisho ke ukuthi ayikulungele noma ke ayikho suitable ukuthi ke identify noma ukhona ongatholakala kuyona.
And when you have done your examination comparison, you come to a conclusion which is a match. You say that there is sufficient agreement. What is meant by sufficient agreement?
My Lord, when we say it's a sufficient, we have sufficient agreement of individual characteristics or individual marks. That's when you look at the similarities. If the similarities that you see on both items are exactly the same, you can say that this is a match.
Lana ke uma ke usuqhathanisa ke usuyathola ke ukuthi ke lokho oqhathanisayo ke lamazibitha amabili ke kufana ngamashi ila esisho khona ke manje sibenzisa ke legama ke elithi ke sufficient agreement ngoba ke lokho okuthola ngala uyathola nangala.
Now, there's an acronym AFTE, AFTE. Do you know it and do you know what it stands for?
Yes, my Lord, I attended the AFTE seminar in 2012 in New York, in Buffalo City. AFTE is a seminar, Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners.
Umukhuluma nge-AFTE ukhuluma ke ngeseminar engaya kuyona ke eNew York which year?
2012.
2012.
Sorry, at which institute or university?
It's an association of toolmark examiners from different countries. They normally meet every year.
Lana ke sikhuluma ke ngenhlangano noma association ke ehlangana unyaka nonyaka futhi ke kuya kumazwe ahlukene.
And correctly so, it's an international association of members who are firearms and toolmark examiners.
That's correct, yes.
Lena ke inhlangano ke abantu ababuya ke kumazwe ahlukahlukene futhi ke abasebenza ngazo ke ibham noma ke lokho bizwa ukuthi ama-tool marks.
And there are members to AFTE, associate members and non-members, but all of you, and when I say you, I mean firearm and toolmark examiners, you adhere to AFTE's standards, theories, and principles when you do your examination comparison of ballistic evidence, tools, and bullet components, whatever you are doing in your field.
That's correct, my Lord.
Kuyiqiniso ukuthi sonke ke kuyo nhlangano noma la sihlangana khona ke sisebenza noma senza ke izinto ngokwendlela ke elindele yayo le nhlangano.
And there's what is called AFTE's theory of identification. Do you know it?
Yes, I know the AFTE theory of identification.
Nayo ke i-AFTE theory leyo ngiyayazi.
Can you, in brief, explain the general principles of that theory?
Theory of identification?
Yes.
Right. With the theory of identification, my Lord, is when you look, you take you do your comparison, and in your comparison, you look at the similarities of your exhibit, maybe, or your specimen. And during the process of your comparison, in the theory, you look at the similarities. You start with your class of characteristics. You go to your subclass, if there's any subclass, and then you go to your individual markings. Your comparison on those things. When you do the theory of identification, normally what we are looking at, it's a pattern match. You look at the pattern. If there's any pattern, like the shape of your firing pin, what marks do we have in the firing pin? Sometimes you find that it's not striation, it's a pattern. You compare the pattern. If one firearm has been used to do to create patterns, you will see all your patterns on all your firearms or the specimens which are fired in a specific firearm. So normally with the
AFTE.
No, with the theory of identification, you do your comparison based on that. You look at the contour, you look at the depth of your markings, you look at the spacings of all your markings or between the markings on those. That's a theory that we normally use when you do your comparison.
And what does that theory, so sorry, Mr. Jonas? Eh?
Just go on. I mean, that's Greek to me. So for you to go so long and expect me to, so just go on. It's the same thing I requested yesterday. Just go on.
No, but the accused persons
No,
need
but
to
we
know.
need to be fair.
Yes.
I asked this yesterday, so
Yes.
it's repeating. So what must I interpret?
Colonel Mangena, I'm going to request you, for the purposes that the accused can also be interpreted to what is being said. Break down your answers in small sections and allow Mr. Jonas to interpret. So let's start at the beginning.
I apologize for that, Manu.
Let's start at the beginning. Just give me the gist of the three principles on which the AFTE theory of identification is based.
Right. With the three principles of the AFTE theory,
Let me be fair to you, Colonel. If you've got a literature in front of you, you can just read it verbatim as is, then you can explain it.
right? With the theory of identification, as it pertains to the comparison of a tool mark, enables the opinion of common origin to be made when the unique surface, contour, and of two tool marks are sufficient.
Yes, allow you to
Agreement.
interpret, please.
Uma sikhuluma ke, yeah. Uma sikhuluma nge-theory noma lokho okuchazayo noma identification kumayelana nokuqhathanisa lokho okubizwa ngokuthi ke ama-tool mark. Wona ke anikeza ngovo nokuchaza ke ukuthi ke la okusuka khona ke lokho kwenziwa kanye futhi ke nama-tool mark amabili ukuthi ke anele lokho kubizwa ke ngokuthi ngesivumelwano noma isivumelwano esanele sufficient agreement.
And the second principle, Colonel?
That the sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random tool mark as evidenced by the correspondence of the pattern or combination of patterns on the surface contour.
Yeah, read it, all of it, the whole of the second
right.
principle, then he'll interpret.
The significance is determined by the comparative examination of two or more set of surface contours, patterns, comparisons, and individual peaks, ridges, and furrows, especially the relative heights, depth, width, curvatures, and spatial relationships of the individual peaks, ridges, and furrows within one set of our surface contour are defined as and compared to corresponding features of the second set of the surface contour. Agreement is significant when the agreement in individual characteristics exceed the best agreement demonstrated between the tool marks are known to have been produced by the different tools and is consistent with the agreement demonstrated by tools known to have been produced by the same tool. The statement that sufficient agreement exists between two tool marks means that the agreement of individual characteristics is of a quantity and quality, that the likelihood that another tool could have made marks is so remote that, or is so remote to be considered a practical impossible.
Through the court, my lord, can I just ask this to be explained in layman's terms? Is this correct?
But you know what? I've read about ballistics. The tools are not applicable here. Is that not so, sir? With consent about ballistics. A tool I know,
With a tool,
yeah, you can take an X. The
With the
contour, the
tools,
depth, the width, fine. But I
also
think this
depend-
court is concerned about the ballistics in this case.
My lord, let the expert
Yes,
testify.
yes,
He's explaining,
Yes.
because I said firearms and tool marks. And this principle, this theory of identification covers both experts who are tool mark examiners, who are firearm
But he's reading
ballistic
from there.
examiners.
You see, that's my problem.
He's reading?
You said you must read from there. You said
Yes,
so.
yes,
Okay.
Yes.
Because I'm interested in the application.
yes, I'm coming to that.
Has he ever applied all those theories?
I'm coming to that, my
Oh,
lord.
okay,
My
fine.
lord is jumping the gun.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
right, in simple layman's language, my lord, is how you do comparison. You are comparing the contour, you're comparing the marks transferred to a firearm. By a firearm to your tool mark, it's either your bullet or your cartridge cases. You look at the contour, you look at the spacings of your marks, you look at the continuity of it.
Lana nje ngafishi nje ukuthi yonke lokho bekufunda la ku number 2 ukuthi ukuqhathanisa noma ukuthola ke ama marks noma yini ke kusona ke isibhamu noma okundluliselwe isona isibhamu noma kudluliselwa kwinhlamvu. Yes.
Right, when you say that there's agreement of sufficient marks, it's when all those are in line and are consistent. Where you can see the similarities, the contour is the same, the mark depth sometimes becomes exactly the same, or it all depends on your firearm. But all those marks will be exactly the same. Then, where it will be impossible for two different tools to create the same marks like those ones.
Lana ke mase sikhuluma manje ngayo ke i-sufficient agreement sikhuluma ngokuthi ke onke ke lama marks noma konke lokhu okubhekayo ke uyakuthola ukuthi ke isibhamu ngaba yini ke lama characteristics noma le impawu lezi edluliselwe isona isibhamu kuyona inhlamvu.
And let me just quickly read the third leg of the theory. It says, currently the interpretation of individualization and or identification is subjective in nature, founded on scientific principles and based on the examiner's training and experience. Right?
That's correct, yes.
So practically what it says, for you as an examiner, correct me if I'm wrong, to say that there's a match or there's not a match, everything, the testing that you do is subjective. And your conclusion as well is subjective.
That's correct.
Lana ke yebo okushiwo ke ilokho ke ukuthi ke noma yini ke othi uma usuwenzile ke umsebenzi wakho ke oyitholayo egcineni noma ke isinqumo ofikelela kusona ke egcineni ukuthi ke siyakwazi ke ukuthi ke sibhekwe naso leso sinqumo leso noma lokho okutholile.
Sorry.
That subjectivity is based on what? It must be predicated on some factors.
As I said, it's based on
Yeah.
the training and experience that you have.
That's it.
Yes.
So it's not your own subjectivity. It's based on the training which you have undergone to
And
interpret
experience.
the factors which you are saying the sufficient commonality.
That's correct, my lord.
Lokho ke kuya ngokuqeqeshwa ke ukuthi ke indlela ke owaqeqeshwa ngayo ukuthi ke umsebenzi lo uwenze.
And by the way, different trainers are trained by different people, so the training is not universal, correct?
The training is done by different
Yes.
Depends on who's training you and
Yes.
who's.
Kuya ngokuthi ke ubani ke wena ke okunikeza uqeqesho lo noma ubani okutrainayo.
Now, before we go to the mini adjournment, I just want you to touch on 3 characteristics that you normally will find with regards to firearms and bullets and projectiles and cartridge cases. They're defined for us again. Class characteristics, what are they? Say, for example, in this particular case, the CZ 9mm Luger with other Lugers, what are the class characteristics that you are looking at?
The class characteristics of those will be the caliber of the firearm.
Lana ke mase sikhuluma ngayo iCZ i9mm kuzoba ke iloko kubizwa ngokuthi ngama class noma ke kunezinto ezithize ama characteristics athize ayo yikona sizokubheka. Yes.
The number of grooves in the barrel of the firearm.
Ukuthi ke kunama grooves amangaki la ngaphambi kuloko kubizwa ngokuthi ke ibarrel yaso isibhamu.
The twisting of your grooves.
Ukuthi ke ama grooves lawo ke ajika noma atwista kanjani.
And the width of your grooves.
Nokuthi ke futhi ke avuleke kangakanani.
Okay. After the mini adjournment, I'll come back to this one. With regard to grooves in the CZ, the exhibit firearm, let me call it that because since CZ Luger 9mm is alphabet super that will twist my tongue. So let's say the exhibit bullet, firearm.
The CZ-75
The
pistol.
CZ-75 9mm parabellum. How many grooves? Do we count grooves?
It
How
has
many
6 grooves.
Okay.
6 right twisted grooves.
Okay.
Lena ke sikhuluma ngayo iCZ75 yona ke inama grooves awu6 abizwa ngokuthi ke twisted.
And in other firearms, just for completeness sake, there'll be left twisting grooves as well.
We have firearms which are left twisted, but there are very few.
Okay.
Most of the firearms are right twisted.
Okay.
Sinazo ibhamu ke la ke ama grooves atwistela ke kuhlangothi la ngasekunxele kodwa ke ayikho iningi lezo ibhamu eziningi zona twistela ngako right.
Now let's come to a definition of the crux of why we are here, the individual characteristics. What are we looking for or what are they?
The individual characteristics, my lord, can be the imperfections that are inside the firearm, which can create markings on your exhibits. Let's say in the process of manufacturing the firearm, they're using, I would say, blades to cut the grooves, and in the process, there's friction, there's the erosion and there's corrosion, where you find that in that process, some of the marks will be created in the barrel of the firearm or on your grooves. Those irregularities in your barrel will create markings on all your exhibits which you are fired in this firearm. The striations that you see are created by such things, which are could have been created during the manufacturing of this specific firearm. Or it will depend.
Ekwenziweni kwaso ke isibhamu lesi kungenzeka ke ukuthi ke kunezinto ke khona ke noma kwi-barrel lena yaso ke isibhamu kona ke ukungathi ke kundlulisele ke asisebenziseke yona ke inhlamvu ke ama marks athize okwabizile ngokuma term ke ase eyibhamu ama striations kuya ngokuthi indlela ke isibhamu uma senziwe kanjani noma yini ke ama grooves lawo abe khona ngaphakathi noma kuyona ibarrel yesibhamu.
And lastly, on this aspect, what are subclass characteristics?
The subclass might be the ones which are created there, not like the class characteristics. We can have subclasses which are created within, I don't know how to explain, it might be an accidental created during the manufacturing, or in case like cartridge cases where you have the head stamps or the batch number. With those head stamps or batch numbers, we can have the subclass was, it will be only for that limited amount. With the cutting of the grooves, where I said it might be an accidental, you find that the tool that they're using, it creates a specific mark on it. When they change the tool, that mark's no longer there. It will be only on the specific firearms which were created with that specific tool, but not all of them.
Uma sesikhuluma ngawo ke ama subclass kuya ngokuthi ke yiphi ke ithulusi noma ke itool esetshenzisiwe wenza ke isibonele ngayo ngalo igobolondo noma ke icartridge ukuthi ke khona ke laba kubiza ngokuthi ke istamp noma ke uma sekushintshwa ke manje sengasetshenziswa ke leyo tool sekusetshenziswa enye itool ila usuthola khona ukuthi lokhu ukutholile ngaphambili akusekho ke manje.
And now, just before we go to a mini adjustment, when we do identification in terms of a match, do we consider all of these characteristics, or do we only consider some of them to be matching on both sides, the exhibit and the test?
When you do your comparison, my lord, your class characteristics must be there. Your individual markings are the ones that you're concentrating on. And when you're using your individual characteristics, they must be in a relative same position.
Uma usuqhathanisa ke manje kunalokho okubhekayo ke lokho akubizwa ngokuthi ke ama IC my individual characteristics ukuthi ke wona ke kufanele ukuthi abe khona ke lapho kufanele ubheke futhi nendawo ke atholakala kuyona.
Thank you, my lord. It's 11:20.
Are
Will
you
it
through
be
with-
opportune to take this?
Are you through with your cross-examination concerning, as you said you wanted to? You can go on if you think you must finalize this aspect of your cross-examination.
No. I've covered I wanted us to cover the various classes. I'm done with them, my lord. I'm going to move on to the next aspect after the short adjournment.
Is that so?
Yes.
Just from my understanding, you talked about the striations, grooves, lens, etc. Is there a firearm in the world which has, are there two firearms or more, which have the similar striations or grooves inside the barrel?
Inside the barrel?
Yeah,
No, my lord.
never, ever.
Unless if we have to check all the firearms in the world, but the ones that we have ever checked, no. You won't find the
That's what
exactly
two
the same.
professors
So
are
sorry, my
saying.
lord, before the court adjourns, I just want clarification on the bench question. The court asks you, is there two or more firearms that have got the same grooves and striations?
The
My
same
co-
striations.
Sorry?
The same striations.
And grooves, that's what the court is
Yes.
asking you.
No,
Now
I-
we must distinguish between grooves and striations. I want you to clarify that for the court.
You can find the striations inside the groove.
Yes.
Because the striations are created when they cut the grooves inside the firearm. So in the process of cutting the grooves, they are creating the striations which are being transferred to your bullets when you fire a shot.
Okay.
Lokho kubiza ngokuthi iwona ke ama striations iwona ke enzeka ngaphakathi ke noma kubiza kuyona ke igroove uma sekuthi ke manje noma ke asengaphumela kuyona inhlamvu.
Thank you, my lord. Maybe-
No, just last. But those striations and grooves are unique.
They are
They're
unique.
like a
man.
fingerprint.
The striations are unique like a fingerprint.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Oblajet.
madam.